Hey everyone, I'm Meoang and welcome to my Dead by Daylight Guide to Killing. In this guide, we will be going over the killer role in more detail so that those of you who are interested can learn to become better killers. If you are brand new to the game, I recommend that you watch my Dead by Daylight's beginner guide first and then come back to this video. That video is linked in the description below. Now, I've been playing Dead by Daylight since release, and probably 3/4 of that time has been spent on killer. I've gotten to rank 1 killer numerous times, and playing killer is the part of the game that I really love. I see a lot of people struggling with killer, and I think that I have a lot to share that could help some of you learn and improve. This guide will be organized into 4 major sections: the meta, the hunt, the chase, and the kill. If you are relatively new to playing killer, I recommend that you watch this video in its entirety, but there are timestamp links in the description to each of these sections. After this video, I will be doing shorter guides that go over each of the individual killers in more detail, so stay tuned for those videos if you're interested in more information. With all of that out of the way, let's get started with the meta. First of all, the metagame of playing killer changes sometimes, usually when new content is released. So if any major changes are made to the game that alter the information in this video, I will be making follow-up videos for you to check out. If you're watching this guide significantly later than when it was originally posted, check my Dead by Daylight playlist for updates to the killer meta. We'll start by discussing what the killer experience is really like. Playing killer is hard. That's not to say that playing Survivor doesn't have its own unique challenges, but it's a completely different experience. You have no one to help you, and no one to blame but yourself. The 4 survivors will almost always side with one another, and you shouldn't expect any empathy from any of them. I don't want to get into game balance, but I will say that killers are somewhat limited when compared to playing Survivor. Survivors have many tools at their disposal to make the game difficult for you, and it's up to you to learn how to deal with them. One of the biggest concepts in learning to be a good killer is knowing how to dictate the game at your pace. Do not let the survivors have their way. They will come into the game with a certain expectation of how it will play out, and it's up to you to deny these expectations. Just always remember that you are alone as the killer. You have no one to answer to, and the only expectations you have to live up to are your own. You don't have to prove anything to anyone, just enjoy the game in a way that works for you. Before I go on to anything else, I want to talk about the single most important aspect of playing killer: time management. Doing things as quickly as possible while still doing them effectively is how you get better at playing killer. The longer you take to do things, the more progress is completed on generators. Once you find survivors and start interacting with them, generator progress will naturally slow down because survivors will have new problems to deal with. If you're chasing a survivor, that's a survivor not doing generators. If you've hooked a survivor, that's usually at least 2 survivors not doing generators. Some games will seem lost because the survivors make a lot of progress before you can really interact with them, but once you start giving them more problems to deal with, the dynamics of the game can change dramatically. While playing a game, always think about doing things quickly and how you can give survivors new problems to deal with to slow them down. Now we'll move on to the common perks in the killer metagame. I'll go over some of the most generally powerful perks that killers can choose from. Not every killer will want to use all of these perks, but these are perks that you can't go wrong with. It's worth mentioning that some killers have perks that are incredibly useful for them, but not for other killers. I'll be going over these perks in my future killer-specific videos. A Nurse's Calling, unique to the nurse until nurse level 40. This perk highlights survivors who are currently healing or being healed. Each rank of the perk increases the range that you can detect these healing survivors. This perk has benefits for every killer in the game and should be seriously considered for your builds. All survivors will eventually heal themselves when they lose you in a chase. Some do it sooner than others, but eventually they will have to be healed. Having this perk means that when you do lose a survivor in a chase, you might find them again immediately or shortly after. It opens up opportunities for you to track down survivors to down them more quickly. Agitation, unique to the Trapper until level 40. This perk increases your speed when carrying a survivor. Each rank of the perk increases the speed bonus. While agitation is not a necessity, it has benefits for any killer. Less time transporting survivors means more time hunting them down. On top of that, if you find yourself in a position where your only hook options are far away, this perk gives you the opportunity to make it to those hooks. Barbecue and Chili, unique to the Cannibal until level 35. This perk has 2 effects. The first is that every time you hook a new survivor, you get a bonus to blood points earned at the end of the game. The second is that whenever you hook a survivor, All other survivors outside of a certain range from the hook will be revealed to you. Ranking up this perk improves the blood point bonus it gives and shrinks the distance from the hook survivors have to be in order to be revealed. In my opinion, this one perk is the most defining perk of the game. Unlocking it should be one of your primary goals, and it should be run on every killer, every game. The blood point gain is a huge bonus that will speed up completing builds for your killers, and revealing the location of survivors will speed up your gameplay so much that there is almost no downtime while hunting for survivors. Enduring, unique to the Hillbilly until level 30. This perk speeds up your rate of recovery from most stun effects, most commonly pallet stuns. Each rank of the perk increases how fast you recover from stuns. This perk is very useful on killers that struggle with pallet loops and have to often challenge survivors at pallets. If you're going to be running through pallets often to try and punish cocky survivors, this perk makes a huge difference. Even the first rank of this perk cuts your stun time in half, which means that you can get right back to the chase as soon as possible. Likewise, if you're the type of player who just likes to go for hits when survivors are pallet looping, this perk should be a serious consideration for your builds. Hex Ruin, unique to the Hag until level 35. This perk affects a number of survivors and slows down their generator progress. Each affected survivor will get a 5% regression on the generator when they succeed a skill check, and 0% progression when they get a great skill check. This effect is lost when the totem associated with it is destroyed. Each rank of the perk increases the number of survivors affected by it. This is a perk that I use as often as I can afford to. Its presence makes a huge difference in the way survivors play. It will either significantly slow down generator progress, or it will give survivors an alternative objective that they need to complete. Either way, it means more time for you to hunt them down. Whispers, unlocked by default. Whispers alerts you when at least one survivor is within a certain range of the killer. The range gets smaller with each rank of the perk. This is one of my personal favorite perks because I hate games that drag on because I can't hunt down the last few survivors. It's not necessary on every killer, and for some people it won't be necessary at all, but it makes a huge difference for certain playstyles. It's worth noting that this perk is not very strong until you have the 3rd rank. A lot of you newer killer players might be watching this and thinking that it will take forever to unlock all of these perks, and you would be right. Unlocking all of the teachables you want to use will take some time, so I'll go over other general perks to look out for while you're starting out. Iron Grasp. This perk reduces the effect of survivors struggling when carrying them, and also lets you carry them for longer. Each rank of the perk decreases the effects of survivors struggling, and increases the amount of time you can hold them. This perk is extremely similar to Agitation, just slightly worse. It's a solid perk on any killer, and it should be something you look out for when starting out. Hex, No One Escapes Death. This perk increases your movement speed and attack speed after the exit gates are powered on. It also allows you to down survivors in one hit at the 3rd rank. This perk is only really useful at rank 3, but if you do get it to rank 3 while starting out, it's something seriously worth considering. When you're new and don't have a lot of the more powerful perks, the exit gates will be powered on more frequently. Being able to chase down and kill survivors quickly during this section of the game will increase your overall success. Also, Whispers is a perk that is unlocked by default, so always keep an eye out for it when you're new. In addition to the perks I've mentioned here, take a look at each killer's unique perks when leveling them. Some killers will have great options to replace perks that you might not have unlocked yet. For example, if you don't have Hex Ruin while you're leveling the Doctor, you can just use Overcharge instead, because it will also slow down generator progress. Now that you have an idea of how you should approach playing killer and what perks you should be looking to use, let's talk about actually playing games. We'll start with the hunt. All matches start with the hunt. Sometimes the hunt will be a short period of the game before the action starts, and then the action never really stops. Other games you will lose the survivors and you will need to start hunting them down again. Some perks make the hunt easier, but in general there are a few things to keep in mind. The most basic part of hunting down the survivors is to loop through the generators. Survivors will eventually have to interact with them, so generators are where you will most often run into a survivor for the first time. When the game starts, or when you need to start hunting again, start checking each generator one after the other. Make a mental note of whether or not the generator has work done on it and how much work has been done. If work has been done on a generator, you almost always want to damage the generator to slow down the survivors, but also to give yourself a way of knowing if survivors have been to this generator since you last checked. If it becomes clear that a survivor is near a generator that you were checking, it is usually worth your time to stop and locate the survivor. Many survivors will just try to hide when they see you coming, so try to put yourself in a survivor mindset and check places that you would hide if you had to hide quickly. If you loop back to a generator that you previously damaged and you notice that it isn't damaged anymore, there is a very good chance that a survivor is nearby. Take a second to look for them, but don't waste time there if you cannot locate them quickly. Remember, there are 4 survivors and you only need to find one of them at a time. You might be wasting time looking for a survivor if there's another survivor that can be more easily located. With all that said, many times you get near a survivor and they will simply start running away and the chase will begin. Either way, once you find a survivor, it's time to catch them. The chase is where you'll be spending most of your game time. Chasing a survivor down can be a really quick process or an incredibly long one, depending on the skill level of the survivor you found. Something to keep in mind is that it's sometimes worth it to give up on a chase. If you run into another survivor doing a generator while you're in a chase, it might be worth it to start chasing the second survivor. Likewise, if you're chasing a particularly skilled survivor and you notice that there's another survivor who might not be as good at the game, it's often worth it to chase down the less skilled survivor first. Try to keep in mind that as long as you chase one of the survivors down and hook them, you are giving the whole team of survivors new problems to deal with. Oftentimes, hooking the least skilled player on the team is the fastest way to slow them down. All chases will eventually end though. Your job is to make them end as quickly as possible. Ending chases quickly more or less comes down to knowing how to deal with obstacles between you and the survivor, as well as dealing with some survivor perks. The first obstacle that survivors can use are vaulting points. These are windows or ledges that survivors can quickly jump over, but killers go over slowly. If possible, you should try to find a way to walk around these vaulting points in order to keep your momentum going. But some maps have vaulting points without any real option around them, and it becomes necessary to just vault over it yourself. If you're in a chase where you are being looped around a particularly difficult vaulting point, you can either leave that chase to find a survivor in a worse location, or continue looping around that vaulting point until you eventually catch up to that survivor. You will eventually catch them, but it might be a better use of your time to go somewhere else. The other obstacle between you and survivors are pallets. Knowing how to deal with pallets is probably the single biggest skill that you can have as a killer player. Pallets are usually a survivor's best option to slow you down, so you should get used to dealing with them. Less skilled survivors will run away from you and drop pallets in your way as they go. Simply walk around these pallets and continue the chase. If the survivor goes around back to the pallet to try and jump over it, decide whether or not you'll be able to hit them before they make it. If you can't, then you should break the pallet and continue the chase. Skilled survivors will utilize pallets more effectively. This leads us to the infamous pallet loop. The survivor will run around the pallet as tightly as possible in circles until you are almost close enough to hit them. Then the survivor will drop the pallet and run to a new pallet to loop. Against the best of survivors, your options are basically limited to following these survivors until they run out of pallets to use. Try your best not to get hit by pallets ever, but also keep an eye on how the survivor reacts to you getting close. If the survivor hesitates for a moment before dropping the pallet, it's probably worth the effort to try to swing through the pallet before they can drop it. While it can be annoying to run around pallets for a long time, keep in mind that every pallet you break is one less pallet for survivors to use in future chases. The longer the game goes on, the easier the chases will get. Before moving on, I want to talk about Decisive Strike. This survivor perk allows the survivor to stun you and keep on running away when they are picked up for the first time. You know at least one survivor probably has Decisive Strike when you have an obsession during a game, so always keep it in the back of your mind while playing. This perk becomes incredibly common at higher ranks, so get ready to deal with longer chases. Eventually, though, you will down the survivor and pick them up. This leads us to the kill. Your last job as the killer is to get the kills. To get those kills, you need to get the survivor to a hook. Do a quick spin to locate the hook nearest to you and head over there. Often this is a simple process, but sometimes survivors will attempt to block you from moving on your way to the hook. Your goal here is to be as efficient as possible so that the survivor you are holding does not get a chance to wiggle free. Hit the survivor trying to block you as soon as they're close enough, and then move on. Now that you've hooked the survivor, there are 3 main ways to get them killed. The first is to let a survivor stay in a dying state long enough that they bleed out. This very rarely happens, but it's something to keep in mind as an option if you're under a lot of pressure. The second is when a survivor's time on a hook runs out and they are sacrificed. This rarely happens in skilled games, but it's something that pressures survivors into acting quickly. You almost never want to stay with a hooked survivor until they are sacrificed. Your time can usually be better spent elsewhere slowing down additional survivors. With that said, sometimes it is in your best interest to stay near a hook if you believe that some of the other survivors are nearby. If one of the survivors is on the hook and at least one of the other survivors is nearby, it's your job to find that other survivor. You don't want to just stand by the hook and wait, you want to hunt them down and chase them. If a survivor is unhooked when you're nearby, you want to go back and try to down them again. A survivor getting unhooked means that you know exactly where at least 2 survivors were at that time, and if you're close, you need to follow up on it. The most common way to kill a survivor, though, is to hook them after they've been to the struggle phase. For those of you who might not know, hooking a survivor 3 times will instantly sacrifice them. The first time they are hooked, they can try to escape with a low chance of success. The second time they are hooked, they have to struggle to stay alive. The third time, they're sacrificed instantly. If a survivor makes it to the struggle phase after only being hooked once, they will still be sacrificed instantly when hooked again. This means that if a survivor is close to the struggle phase of the hook and you're still nearby, it's usually worth the time to stick around until they get to that struggle phase. That's one less time you have to hook them. The majority of the time, though, you will hook a survivor, then just move on to hunting for another one. Don't spend time near a hooked survivor if you don't have to. Keep a mental note of how many times you've hooked each survivor so you know who to prioritize in chases. If a survivor is 1 hook away from being sacrificed, prioritize chasing them down whenever possible. The last thing I want to talk about is the perk Borrowed Time. It's a perk unlocked by playing Bill, so always keep it in mind when facing Bill players. Borrowed Time allows the survivor to be hit 1 additional time before going down right after making a hook save or right after being saved from the hook. If they are hit this additional time, a short timer will start. When that timer ends, the survivor will go down. It is almost always worth your time to chase down someone after Borrowed Time has been activated. You don't have to hit them, you just have to not lose them until their time is up. With all of that information, you're ready to start working on becoming a better killer. I recommend playing a few games, then checking out this video again to review. If you have any questions, please leave them as YouTube comments and I'll get to them as soon as possible. After this video, I'll be making a video on each killer and how to play them. I'll go over their strength in the current meta, how much I enjoy playing them, how to play them effectively, what perks to look out for, what add-ons to look out for, and I will include an example game at the end of each video. I hope this helped you all learn to play killer more effectively. I normally don't ask, but I'm trying to keep my YouTube partnership and I'm very close to the required 1,000 subscribers. If you like this video and would like to see more like it, consider subscribing. Thanks for watching everyone, and stay tuned for the next video in the series.